Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of And Action Filmmaking Podcast. I'm Tommy DiNucci. As always, here is my co-host, Mikey Messier. He's actually over there. Today we have yet again, by accident, color coordinated with our green on. That was totally by accident. This is not planned. Today we got a fun topic. It's actually the most fun genre of them all. And we're going to be talking about comedy here on episode 84 of And Action Filmmaking Podcast. And the reason why we're talking about comedy is because I am about 55 days, to be exact, not that anyone's counting, away from starting production on my very first comedy film. It's a feature, the whole deal. And, a lot of people that have been following my career, they know I've done horror movies. I've done a couple of action movies. I've done some crime dramas. I've even done some freaking family Christmas movies. But I've never once dabbled in the world of comedy. And although there have been, some funny moments in a lot of my movies, none of them have been kind of just a straight up comedy in terms of how we tell the story. And some of them were funny, and they weren't intentionally funny. This is the first, I've been telling my friends, this is the first intentionally funny movie that I'm making. Mike, I've been a fan of this genre ever since I was a youngin. I think we all kind of come up as kids loving comedy. I think that's like almost like the first love. Like who doesn't like to laugh? So I'm excited for it, man. I'm up for it. Brother, what the hell have you been up to? I see you got your all comedy short film festival on there for the occasion.
Yeah, Tommy, thanks. I ran that festival in May of 2024, just a couple of months ago, and the entries are open for the second edition of the All Comedy Short Film Festival. And comedy is such an interesting genre, Tommy, because we got entries from all over the world, and it's interesting how different cultures and how sometimes the similarities and also the differences in what's considered funny, but it really, Tommy, for each individual person, I mean, that you've hung out with people or a group of people and they're laughing about something, you're like, why are they even laughing? But I think that makes it really hard when you're making a big budget or even a medium or small budget movie, is how do you get the most amount of people to laugh with a 90-minute or 2-hour film or a sitcom? I mean, because comedy is so unique, just the sense of humor. Some people like deadpan delivery. Some people like more outrageous stuff. You think of the Jim Carrey movies from 20 years ago or Will Ferrell. And sometimes it seems like one performer can kind of bend the will of the general audience in their direction, like a Jack Black came along and suddenly people like that type of thing. But it's a really fascinating what makes us laugh. And also, Tommy, what stuff holds up after 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and what stuff kind of
Yes.
falls by the wayside, I mean, and with, political correctness and cancel culture and hashtag this and hashtag that, some things that might have been acceptable or encouraged, with something like Revenge of the Nerds, 30 years ago may not be as well received these days if it were made now. So it's all over the place, man. It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah, it really is. And you mentioned you said a mouthful there, Mike. So let me just kind of break down a couple of the points that you made. One of the things that you said that kind of rings true is translation. What is funny here in the United States might not be funny in Germany, might not be funny in Japan, might not be funny in, name that other country. And the reality is that's a big challenge with comedy. And one of the reasons why, as a filmmaker, for many years, I've been kind of told like, hey, you kind of want to avoid comedy because the reality is, not to get into this side of it, because it's not, we don't do this just for money, but it is a job. And the reality is comedies tend to make less money worldwide for that very reason, because something like Old School, for example, and that's just like a, classic American comedy from 20 years ago, but, that probably still plays today. But if you play that in another country, it just might not hit, like those jokes might not hit. Culturally, they might not even be aware of the references that you're making. So it's a tough genre because you don't kind of have, number one, you don't have that kind of international appeal all the time. And number two, like Mike just said, sometimes comedy doesn't really hold up very well over time. It's kind of funny. Some of the greatest movies that, I'm at the point now, I just had a birthday and I turned the big 40 a couple weeks ago. So I'm 40, I'm doing my thing here, right in the middle of the pack of age. And it's funny, a lot of the younger filmmakers and kids that I work with, they're in their early 20s. My assistant, Mike, he's, 23 years old. And a lot of times there have been instances when I've like showed him a movie or a scene in a movie that I remember being really funny, maybe when I was 15, 16. And then you watch it back today and you're like, style of comedy doesn't really hold up. It's not quite as funny as I remembered it. And then of course there are the classics where, you watch a movie like Caddyshack, which is, one of the greatest American comedies of all time. And I think if you watch that, yeah, there's going to be moments where it's dated for sure, but there's still going to be laugh out loud moments that, kind of, I think you could put a 15, 16-year-old kid in front of that and show it to him for the first time and they would find humor in it. So it really is like it's a tough science, man. It's not easy.
I think about things that younger people are doing these days, and a lot of times you'll see these YouTube videos where there's some type of storyline going, and then they'll have a quick cut to a little meme or a little blip of some other totally unrelated project that's not even their own, and it's because that pop culture reference point, whether it's a video game or Kim Kardashian or whatever it is, or Homer Simpson going back in the bushes or whatever type of thing it is, like that's a big way of doing comedy now, is just these reference points. And for me, buddy, because I grew up before YouTube and stuff like that, you never would have thought of that. You never would have thought of, well, I'm making my comedy video and I'm going to do a cutaway to something that was 15 or 10 years earlier. And the audience, I'm just going to assume is going to know the joke, but that's, things just change. And I also think about actors, man, like Bill Murray and Chevy Chase and that crew from those days in Caddyshack and Saturday Night Live. I think a lot of times the audiences, find humor in particular actors or actresses, whether, Molly Shannon or Melissa McCarthy, and whatever that Will Ferrell, and whatever that person, Eddie Murphy is a big icon. Whatever that person does for 5 or 10 years, the audience is going to, suck it
they
up
just
like
assume
soup.
That's comedy. They just,
Right.
Yeah, there's no question that, and I'm sure this still holds up today because he's still, to me, considered to be one of the funniest men on the planet. But I remember as a kid watching Will Ferrell on Saturday Night Live, and there were at the high water mark of Will Ferrell's funniness.
Yeah.
He could kind of just look at the camera and you would pop, like people would laugh. Like he didn't have to do anything. Like he could literally just come out on stage and people were ready to laugh. So yeah, there's definitely that, that's the funny thing about comedy. I mean, it's just like, I know you've studied a little stand-up comedy in the past, Mike, and there are stand-up comedians that they'll tell you, like, once you get those first couple laughs, the audience is kind of just yours. And they're like, okay, this person is here to make us laugh. We accept them. That is their job. And we will embrace that by laughing at every fucking thing they say moving forward. So yeah, comedy is definitely a big part of it all. And Mike, you make a good point. I think meme culture, GIF culture, social media, comedy culture, it really has changed a little bit in the sense that people are looking for a much quicker joke. Like the pops have to come quicker and faster. And I think that does translate when you're making narrative movies. Because again, this is, it's a filmmaking podcast. So we're going to try to keep it focused just on comedy as it relates to making feature length films. But you do have to pay attention to the trends and the cultures and realize that, the youth of the world, they don't have the patience for, a longer setup to a punchline. They kind of want immediacy. They want the jokes to be rolling out fast, but not in a shticky, slapsticky way. I feel like you mentioned something in the opening, Mike, dry humor is becoming, more and more popular in the sense where it's like, the movie that I have coming up, which I don't want to say too much about it yet. All I can say is there's a comedy that's going to be coming up real soon. I don't want to let too many cats out of the bag, but this is And Action, and for our And Action listeners that watch every week, they'll know that I'll often share something that hasn't quite been released officially. I'll tip some information out. So this hasn't been released yet. We haven't made any announcements, but there is a movie coming real soon, and it's hopefully going to be funny. So I'm studying a lot of comedy right now. That's kind of what I'm doing. I'm spending these next 7 or 8 weeks just kind of digesting as much as I can, and figuring out how I can kind of use what worked in the past to help me in my movies. But again, it's not just about the past. You have to like look at what's current. And Mike, you made a point that almost reminded me. It's kind of like, you have all of these funny influencers on social media that are setting up something and then paying it off with a clip of a famous video or another meme or another GIF or whatever. It's almost like what hip hop artists did in like the late 70s, early 80s, and they still do today, where like they'll take an old track and dust it off and kind of make it new again.
Right.
It's like how many rap songs do you hear? And it's not just rap. I mean, country does this more. I feel like hip hop kind of originated that, but all genres do it now, where you'll hear like, oh wait, that's a hit from 20 years ago. They took the hook from a hit from 20 years ago. Like, for example, Eminem just had a new song come out, and he's rapping to that song Abracadabra, which is that 80s abracadabra.
Steve Miller. Was that the Steve Miller
Yeah.
song? Yeah.
Yeah, so he's like rapping under that hook, and it's like crazy. They dust these things off. And I guess, that's kind of what makes pop culture fun, the ability to kind of take something and make it new again. So yeah, basically, we're in the process of prepping this movie. I'm very excited about it. And I can say this too. It's a little bit, I don't want to say it's a sports movie, but there's a bit of a sports backdrop to this one. So I've been digesting a lot of the classic sports comedies, movies like Dodgeball,
right?
Movies like Happy Gilmore, Kingpin, all the classics that are kind of surrounding sports, but it's not really about the sports. It's about the players on the team. It's about the ridiculous scenarios. And I'd like to think that, again, there's so many different sort of, if you were to say take the word comedy and then draw a big circle around it, you could have dozens, if not probably 100 different offshoots of different styles of comedy. There's slapstick comedy. There's, funny because it's so ridiculous comedy. There's that more like that Farley Brothers style comedy where it's funny because we're going to show you something kind of absurd and extreme. Then there's the Larry David comedy where it's funny because it's so awkward that you're just like, oh my God, I can't even imagine being in this situation. And that's what makes it funny. I would say that this movie kind of is a bit of a hybrid, between that Larry David, I believe it's called situational comedy, where it's like you're putting people in odd situations and seeing how they react, normal people in weird scenarios, or weird people in normal scenarios. There's always going to be humor in that. And I think this also has some of those, I hate to say this because when you say things like this, you almost always set yourself up for disaster. But I'm trying to make it have some of those throwback vibes to harken back to some of those like late 90s, early 2000s comedies that I grew up on, the like I said, I just mentioned a few of them, but the Happy Gilmores, the Dodgeballs, movies that kind of make you feel something on top of having yes, they're funny, but we're also going to go on a little bit of an adventure. We're going to tell a story, and you're going to fall in love with these characters. You're not going to want to just laugh at them because they're silly. You're going to care about them a little bit too. And I think that's kind of that's the tricky part, Mike.
Yeah. Well, Adam Sandler, you mentioned a few of his things. He had like a whole, he still does them, but basically, you could call them the man-child comedies. And I think, Chris Farley had started doing that before he passed away. And then guys like Adam Sandler, and maybe you could even say Mike Myers with Austin Powers and some of his guys. But basically, like you have the man-child and Adam Sandler. What's the one where he adopts the kid, stepdaddy or daddy something?
Big Daddy.
Big
Classic.
Daddy, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, you have the Sandler where he's playing a guy who's in his 30s or whatever, but he can't quite grow up until he meets some beautiful girl that he has to impress, and so he has
Story of my life, brother. Story of my life.
Right, and he has to go through some character arc where he learns some lesson, or he gets a job, or he's more responsible with his money, and I think audiences will go along with those with any hot actor or hot actress for 4 or 5 movies, and then I think eventually there is sometimes a throwback or a backlash if someone gets to be too successful, or if they start to do the same movie too many times. I think the audience sometimes will say, you know what, we don't like Eddie Murphy anymore, or we don't like Will Ferrell anymore. And sometimes when these actors step out of the comfort zone, like Will Ferrell did he did a couple of dramatic movies, and people really didn't want to see him in dramatic movies. Like he did something called, I think
Sure.
he did like a movie that was kind of like an artsy, the
You
author of
know,
the
I,
book is in it type of thing, and
I,
people turn on him.
they did turn on Will for that. Will did a couple of serious movies, and I liked him. And I think Adam Sandler, Punch Drunk Love,
I
great
like that
film.
one. Yeah.
Adam Sandler. That's Paul Thomas Anderson. It's a classic. Uh, Jim Carrey. You could say that the Truman Show isn't really a comedy by any means. I feel like every sort of comedic juggernaut is eventually going to want to show that they got that range. Look at Robin Williams. I mean, you could argue that Robin Williams is probably one of the top 5 funniest people to ever walk the face of the earth, if not the funniest. And look at his performance in Good Will Hunting. So um, they always say. I mean, they do all of the greats. When I say they, I'm saying like anyone who I've really had a conversation with that I feel is truly a bit of an authority on acting, on filmmaking. They've all told me that comedy is the hardest thing to achieve. Anyone can pretend to be sad, anyone can pretend to be happy, but to really like make someone laugh, it's such a unique challenge because, like we discussed earlier, Mike, everybody finds something different funny. We all have these unique kind of tastes in what's funny. But I think we can kind of, without question, say that there are some people that have kind of just nailed it for the general public, for the general population, the average funny bone. And we mentioned them all: the Jim Carreys, the Adam Sandlers, the Jack Blacks. Um, I think you could probably, although if you want to go way back, obviously you mentioned Eddie Murphy. I think Chris Tucker had a moment where he was like one of the funniest people on the planet.
Right.
But like you said, Mike, there's people. I just knocked my whole table. It's like we had an earthquake in Cranston. I think people, I think it's very challenging to be funny for like a continued period of time. I do think that, like you said, seems like everyone had, seems like the standard like star comic, comic turned actor has about a 5-year run, and then something else comes around. Like, one that's coming to mind, and you might be like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" Anybody remember Dane Cook? Dane Cook was a
Yeah,
stand-up
for a cup of
comedian
coffee.
who Dane Cook was a stand-up comedian who literally came on, was selling out fucking stadiums. He was selling out arenas. Like I remember I went to see Dane Cook live uh, at the Fleet Center in Boston. At the time, it was the Fleet Center. Now it's the Garden or whatever they call it. I don't even know what they're calling it now. But my point is, this guy was selling out, 20,000 people arenas and getting to star in a run of films. I think there were probably like 3 or 4 movies that they basically, gave him the top spot and packaged these films around him. And 5 years later, you couldn't finance a Dane Cook movie. Like if you said to me as a producer, like I've got Dane Cook attached to this movie, I'd be like, good luck getting financing. And I'm not saying that I don't know Dane Cook personally. I'm sure he's an awesome guy. And I bet you he's hilarious and great to be around. But again, it shows you how this industry can kind of, specifically comedy, seems like you get chewed up and spit out pretty quick. And that's why, whether you like him or not, like you got to look at, and of course, we're going out of the realm of film now. We're kind of getting into stand-up territory, and I want to rein it back in after this. But that's why you got your Jerry Seinfelds of the world, like people who are just kind of like ambassadors of what is funny for decades and decades and decades.
I would say that with Dane Cook, man, I watched some type of YouTube video, and basically Dane was kind of an early cancel culture guy because he had a much younger spouse type of thing. And
Is that what happened to Dane?
yeah, I don't want to say anything that's incorrect, but basically, I don't think I think it was just a deal where people found his relationships with women to be a bit tawdry or perhaps inappropriate, and I think Dane Cook, 52, is foolishly in love with 25-year-old wife, wants to share every victory lap with her. So I don't know how old she was when they started
Well,
going
hey,
out, but
I mean,
but I don't know how old she was. Like I said,
we're not here to
I don't know
judge.
the whole
We're not here
deal.
to
Right.
judge. Yeah, we're not here to judge on end action. And the reality is, I mean, 25 is young, but that's it's a legal adult as far as
That's
I know.
when, but that's when this article was written. We don't want to waste time with their whole deal, but
Yeah,
E-
the
Eric
reality is, yeah,
Eric
the
Johnson's
reality
time.
is, yeah, you can fall off pretty quickly. And I think, whether you're offset antics or not, I think that's still kind of something that every comedic actor, every comedic star runs the risk of kind of the business passing them by a little bit, the genre passing them by.
Yeah, our comments. Eric Johnson's kind of blowing up. I want to give him a shout out before he takes his enthusiasm somewhere else. But he's going off on dark comedies and dramedies, which I actually like quite a bit too. Eric, I started watching this Hulu show called Unprisoned with Kerry Washington and Delroy Lindo as a daughter who has a father that's coming out of prison and upsetting her life. And it's labeled as a comedy, but it's more like a dramedy, and I really like dramedies, Tommy. I really like a movie or a TV show where it's real people having real problems. There is a comedic element, but they're not like playing for laughs. Like it's more like the comedy comes out of the tragedies that is life. You know what I mean? With relationships and people doing things incorrectly and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So
Eric says, I think part of comedy is being new and subversive. So once you are filling arenas, you're no longer new, and their subversive material is now the norm and less edgy. Yeah, that's a good point. I had also heard it, and this is becoming a Dane Cook bashing session, and I apologize in advance, but I had heard from some stand-up comedian friends that Dane Cook was also notorious for stealing other less known comedians material and basically just reworking it and then putting it out on the mainstream. But again, I'm sure every comedian steals shit. I mean, I know all writers steal shit. Hell, I've stole shit before. That isn't that like part of the job. Okay, let's see. Lance, our dear friend Laza is back. Watch the John Leguizamo's The Pest, which he did in 1992 the other day. He was so annoying and yet funny. Man, that's a fun movie. The Pest is actually kind of a modernization, a comedic modernization of the famous novel, The Greatest, what is it? The Greatest Game, I believe it's called, where you're hunting a human being.
oh, okay.
So it's about a hunter who's hunted every wild and exotic animal out there, but he basically says that hunting humans, that's the greatest game, and he releases people in the woods and hunts them down. It's crazy shit. But yeah, if you haven't seen The Pest, it's kind of a comedic take on that silly shit.
Yeah, a lot of people are filling in some stuff. Laza mentioned something about the film The Departed. Not sure if Martin Scorsese's film The Departed is meant to be a comedy, but it's just as
No,
funny.
it's not. It's not meant to be a comedy, Laza. Come on.
And Charlie, our buddy there, Charlie Short Film says, I personally think comedy is the most difficult genre. Timing is so crucial. That's a great point, Charlie. Timing in comedy is a huge thing. I mean, now I'm going back to the 70s and 80s, or at least the first year of the 80s with John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd and the Blues Brothers. I think a guy like John Belushi could just raise an eyebrow and the audience would love it. And man, I mean, we could go back to Milton Berle. We could go back to anybody. You know what I mean? Laurel and Hardy at their time
Charlie
were
Chaplin.
right.
Charlie Chaplin, man.
Yep. The Keystone Cops. I mean, I think that a lot of their films were either silent or they just had the music. You know what I mean? So, I mean, maybe that's what our society needs, buddy, is a reboot of the Keystone Cops to make everybody love the police again. But
Well,
there's
what would be nice about silent films if they could come back? Most people are watching shit on their phones anyway, and they don't
right.
have the sound on because they're in public, drifting away from any responsibility or actual real life obligations they have around them. So they hide in their phones like we all tend to do, and they watch something silently. So yeah, maybe we got to dust that off and bring it back. I'm a big fan of, one of my favorite all time. I got two that we're gonna shout out to. We're talking comedic actors, guys that growing up, I just loved all of their movies. Shout out to Chevy Chase, who I love Chevy Chase because, as I get a little older, I appreciate his comedy a little bit more because he played like the everyman so well, just like I'm just a regular dad, I'm just a family man, but I'm also going to get into some shit too. And I think that that's something that, I think relatability is important in comedy, right? Like, I think it's all about like, that was always what was so great about Jerry Seinfeld's comedy. It's like, oh yeah, we've all been there before. Like we can all kind of like relate to that. Relatability is everything. I think Chevy Chase was very good at playing like relatable characters because he really was, for the most part, cast as your average Joe. Steve, you could put Steve Martin in that same category, with the exception of the jerk. He played a lot of like regular guys that were just put in crazy situations, and that's what made it funny. And one of my all-time favorites, I gotta go shout out to Big Sky Point to Chris Farley, who like a Belushi had that kind of just wild energy that was just, you could barely capture it, but if you could, it was something special. And I think the one thing that we're learning as we're talking about all these great comedies and all these great comedic actors is casting's important. I mean, you need to have a great story when you're making a great comedy, but it seems like whoever's getting the ball the majority of the times during the game, that's going to get you the victory. It seems like, these are things that I'm thinking of as we cast this movie and this film that I have coming up. We're trying our best to cast a lot of talent that have had, a couple of shining moments in comedies that we all know and love, trying to find the right people that kind of get this genre. That's where I'm at now. Just, I can't wait to talk a little bit more about that. I'm sure that we'll get to do a deep dive on this upcoming film. But it's been fun to kind of check out a lot of these actors that we're currently talking with, negotiating with, trying to put together the puzzle, and see what they've done and see their work and kind of just see all these different styles. It's almost like, to make the reference, comedy is a lot like mixed martial arts. There's in MMA, there are boxers, there are wrestlers, there are martial artists, there are, jujitsu, karate, judo. There's all these different styles, but they all come together to fight, to see who the best is, the ultimate, who can get the best reaction, a win. Well, it's kind of the same way with comedy. There's so many different styles, but they're all, it's all kind of putting those styles together and making something universally fun for everybody.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tommy. And just it's really an interesting thing, and I think we mentioned so many male comedians, but we should balance that a little bit. Lucille Ball was really a groundbreaker in television with comedy. Not just Lucy as really one of the first female leads to take over a sitcom, but her marriage to Desi Arnaz was groundbreaking in that it was a white lady with a Cuban husband, and I think that their show, I mean, back on in time is just so interesting. They had to have separate beds on the I Love Lucy show. A married couple had to sleep in twin beds in the same room, not in the same bed, because people thought it was scandalous for a married couple to sleep in the same bed together portrayed on television. Yet somehow they had a kid. So but as far as her comedy goes, just um, her and her comedic teammate there, the lady that played the neighbor upstairs, just them on the candy line and the assembly line, just so many cool
Ethel,
things.
was it
Ethel,
Ethel?
yeah, it was Ethel, yeah.
I pulled that one out of my chocolate conveyor belt.
The chocolate conveyor belt scene, and then the wine grape scene where they're smashing up
Sure.
the grapes, and that's a thing, Tommy, where like you said, once the audience gets behind somebody for a while, if you had just some random person stomping grapes, it may not be as funny, but because the audience already loved Lucy at that
They're with
point,
her.
they're
Yeah, they're
with
with
her,
her.
stomping those grapes. And but like I think we keep coming back to, it's really an interesting thing with the comedian or the comic actor. Their relationship to the audience is so it's so tenuous or tangible. I mean, I think of a gentleman like Robin Williams, who was so loved on Mork and Mindy, and then he started doing things like Good Morning Vietnam and Popeye the movie, and some of those things hit, some of them didn't, but some hit huge. And Mrs. Doubtfire hit huge, but after a while, towards the last 10 years of Robin Williams' life, he kind of fell out of favor, and I don't know really why. And then when he died, everybody kind of just remembered the good years or the great years with Robin. And as far as I know, he never did anything wrong in the public specter. It just, for whatever reason, he kind of fell out. He was doing some type of TV show that was a drama. He had done a couple of those movies that were more like 1 hour photo, like really dark characters. But
Yeah, if my memory serves me, Mike, and you know, we hate to think about this because I think we want to think about the legendary Robin and all the good times, but I believe right before he passed away, his show got canceled, and
I
I
think
think
you're
that
right.
part of that led to his depression. He had admitted that getting his TV show canceled was really tough on him because you can imagine, going from this, legend that everybody, you ask anybody walking down the street that, what do you think of Robin Williams? They would agree he's one of the funniest people on the planet. Yet they're canceling his TV show. That's a tough pill to swallow. But I think that, what happens, Mike? I think that, they say this in wrestling a lot. You know, sometimes it's good to take a little break and learn a new hold, as they say. And I think that sometimes, and I'm not saying this is what happened to Robin, but it does seem if you look at the last few years of his career, sometimes I think actors will just try to press and they'll just keep, swinging and swinging and putting out a lot more films than they used to. And yeah, some of that's because they need to keep paying those bills. But I think sometimes actors oversaturate themselves once they've hit that peak. They tend to oversaturate their brand a little bit, and they forget that, well, what made it so unique and so special was that you only got it once in a while, and when you did get it, it was really great. Well, if they start to, they go from being in one movie or two movies a year to suddenly being in 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 movies, and the production budgets go from, I was in all these big studio movies to, he's doing a lot more indie movies now. They're probably not going to be as good, right? And then suddenly you look back and you're like, wow, where's so and so been? Where's name that actor been? Like, they haven't done something in a while. And the reality is, no, they've been working. They're not in the caliber projects that you're used to seeing them in. So you probably don't hear about them as much because those movies don't have the advertising dollars to jam them down your throat as much. So it is a tough thing to see. And I think that's why this is such a fascinating genre, because you really can go from being like, the very best to, yeah, we love you, but we're not going to watch your show anymore.
Eric just mentioned Nicolas Cage. I mean, Nicolas Cage, I've seen about 5 Nicolas Cage movies in the last 2 years. And before that, Nick Cage was doing like, straight to streaming or straight to DVD stuff for maybe 5 or 10 years. And for whatever reason, it's like Nicolas Cage, the whoever decided that he needed a comeback, well, he's come back and he's pretty active now. But there was a time,
Well,
Tommy,
you
for
know
eight.
what I say, buddy? I'm going to use an old line from a hip hop classic. Don't call it a comeback. I've been here for years, man. Like, Nicolas Cage hasn't gone anywhere. Yeah, maybe his popularity in terms of box office power has died down. And yeah, he went from being in $100 million national treasure movies to $4 million independent films that go straight to Netflix or straight to name that platform. But if you look at the guy, I mean, he's been working his ass off every year for years. And the reality is he's super talented, man. So I'm happy to see that Nicolas Cage is on this comeback trail. To me, he never went anywhere. I was always a big fan, and you know, I think that talent's always going to shine through. And I think sometimes actors have these little dips, but the talent's always going to come out and prevail. See Eric Johnson here. Eric, it's good to have you with us today. Having all these, we're having a nice conversation about comedy. Williams, in my opinion, had gotten his Oscar and wanted to do weirder things, not just play the caricature, like how Nick Cage had gotten progressively wilder over the years. I think that's a very accurate statement. Anna Kendrick is pretty hilarious. She's a good singer, but then Anna Kendrick was in every musical comedy for 2 to 3 years, and that runs the risk of burnout. Yeah, musical comedy, that's a whole different genre. You see, like different skill sets coming out. I would love to do. That's a little. Maybe someday I'll do some kind of a musical comedy because I just think they're hilarious. What comes to mind, and even though it's a little bit of a strange musical comedy, I absolutely love Team America: World Police. I think it's one of the funniest fucking movies ever. Marionettes Gone Wild, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the brilliant minds behind South Park. Some really fun comedic songs. And that one, Eric, if you haven't seen Team America: World Police and you like musical comedy, you might appreciate that. Laza says Robert De Niro did an interesting film where he kidnaps Jerry Lewis called The King of Comedy. The King of Comedy is a wonderful movie. And in fact, here's a little tidbit for you guys. You want to learn something right now? I'm going to teach you something. The movie The Joker that just came out is a complete homage to the King of Comedy. Watch Joker and then watch King of Comedy and put them side to side and you'll see exactly what I mean. Also, shout out to Martin Scorsese, who directed The King of Comedy. That's a really underrated movie if you haven't seen that one.
And De Niro's in both films, so that's pretty interesting. And I saw something, Tommy, you're talking about how tastes are so unique. I saw a comedy from 2015 on Hulu just about a week ago called The Bronze, and it had like a star meter, like a 3.9 out of 10. And I'm like, I'm going to watch this anyway. And it's Melissa Roch and Gary Cole. Gary Cole played the boss in Office Space, the annoying boss in Office Space. Mm-hmm. So this movie, great. Yeah, this he plays the father of an Olympic gymnast who breaks her foot and she's never the same again. And she's, instead of being like, good natured, oh, I had my run and I'm happy, she hates everything because she's the former gymnast who broke her foot and she doesn't know how to deal with life when she's not the center of attention. And she openly tries to sabotage any young female gymnast from her hometown because she wants to hold on to her standing as the number one gymnast from her small town in Ohio. So it's really an interesting movie because we always hear about these athletes and how they're these great people and everything. But in this movie, she really plays a self-centered narcissist, and it's hilarious. And for me, it was hilarious, but apparently not for most other people because it only had a 3.9 out of 10. But for whatever reason, this type of character and this type of movie struck me as really funny. And I think about a whole decade, Tommy, when I was doing like student short films and independent films, and everybody was making these comedies saying, well, Mike, it's just like The Office. And I never watched The Office at that time. So they were telling me it's just like their script, their independent or student film. They were basically doing things inspired by The Office, which is essentially a mockumentary with a direct to camera technique. I really didn't know what they were talking about. And just about
think about how fascinating, like, that style became so popular. I think you were just about to say it. I didn't mean to jump in, but that's what The Office became to be.
Yeah, and that's when I finally started watching The Office during the pandemic, and I loved it now. But I realized all these things that I missed out on with the memes and the Jim and Pam's and the pointing to the board with Jim and the stick or whatever. But for me, like, I was doing all these little student films and independent films that were ripping off the Office technique of the straight to camera, the funny facial expressions.
And hey, hang on a second, just so everybody knows, those motherfuckers didn't create that shit.
I know, but they popularized it at the time.
I don't know, man. I think Christopher Guest is really the guy who popularized and created that. Yeah, man. Spinal Tap was doing that. That movie came out in the late
84,
80s?
84, 85.
Yeah, mid 80s. So and then You know, it's an obscure comedy that I absolutely love. That fewer and fewer people know about it as the time goes on. But another Christopher Guest movie, Best in Show, which is a bit of a mockumentary
I
about
hate it. Dogs.
dog lovers,
Yeah,
and it's just
yeah,
like it's the most obnoxious people in the world, and I
yeah,
think that's why I like watching it, because you probably hate it, Mike, because you hate those people.
yeah.
They got heat.
The one that was worse than that was A Mighty Wind, the folk singer
About the
parody.
musical.
Yeah, well, about folk singers that
Yeah,
it was a Christopher Guest one, and then he did another
sure.
one, Waiting for
Yeah, they're putting
Guffman.
on, but aren't they like putting on a musical, and they're putting on Oklahoma, a rendition of Oklahoma, I believe.
I think I actually left the theater early, buddy.
Nay,
The
come
Mighty
on.
Wind.
I gotta
But
say, people who leave theaters, like is it that bad that you really need to leave? I've got to say, I've never left a movie theater. I can't
what
imagine a
I
situation where I'd be like, I'm leaving.
I once left a movie and asked for my money back, and the person said, "Well, what's wrong?" And I said, "This the movie really sucks." It was
That's funny.
Scary Movie 4. I stayed in
Wow.
there for about 20 minutes, and I was looking
You're
for
like,
like
fuck this.
another movie in the Warwick Showcase to go see. There was nothing else starting for like 2 hours, so I just said, "No, this movie's really bad, and I don't want to sit through it." And I was only in there for 20 minutes. Can I have my
You
money
tapped
back?
out. Did they give you the money back?
Yeah, they did.
Wow. Well, there you go. There's a little life hack for you. If you're at the movies and the movie's the shits
Yeah,
and you're only 20 minutes in, you might just be able to get your money back and trade it in for some nachos or some a slushy and just get the fuck out of there. Because at that
yeah.
point, who even would want to watch a movie, right?
Yeah, I mean the comments are really jumping up and down today, and we thank everybody. This is our second show back from an extended break. Kim chimed in
Yes.
earlier. Jay Moore, another name. I mean, we are kind of just going down memory lane here, but Jay Moore, who was on SNL with Chris Farley, called Farley the Son, where everything was better.
Jay Moore was really a kind of a forgotten great name in comedy. I love everything that guy's ever done.
Yeah, yeah, he was good. Eric says that Jay Moore called Farley the Son, where everything was better, warmer, and funnier when Chris Farley was present, which that's a nice
Oh,
tribute.
that's sweet.
Um, the Eric, of course, as Rhode Island guys, Tommy, I'm sick of hearing these names, but maybe you're not. The Farley brothers are Rhode Island boys and comedy masterminds. Well, my sob story, Tommy, is I once went to like the Rhode Island International Film Festival because the Farley brothers were like the featured guests, and I bought this expensive ticket and just to see them, and then they didn't show up because they were promoting something about Mary and didn't get a refund on those tickets. So, not that I'm bitter about it, but I guess I am. Uh, interesting
Yeah, the
stuff here.
Farley brothers. Listen, the Farley brothers are definitely, to me, a massive inspiration for a number of reasons. I love their films, but just as a little kid, before I even knew that making movies was a thing, that like it was something that you could do as a job. I remember my dad telling me, because I remember. How about this? I'll tell a little fun story. It was 1994. I was 10 years old, and my dad took me to see Dumb and Dumber. At the time, it was a second run theater called the Park Theater in Cranston, and I remember probably being a little too young to see that movie. 10 years old, probably a little over my head at the time, but I remember just loving it so much and laughing my little face off for the whole, from start to finish. And then I remember walking out of the theater and my dad telling me, like, the guys that directed and wrote that movie are from Rhode Island. That's my dad imitation.
Dad
Um,
voice.
you know, they're from Rhode Island, son. And I just remember thinking that was so cool.
Yeah.
And again, like I didn't even know that I wanted to be a filmmaker at the time. It wouldn't be years until I realized that. But that was always in the back of my head that, like, oh, these guys from Rhode Island, they make these great movies. And then I became huge fans of theirs. So definitely a massive inspiration of mine. And you look at the things that they've done, Green Book went on to win an Oscar for Bobby Farley, which is amazing. So just, to me, those guys are heavyweights, brother. Goddamn heavyweights. Okay, so yeah, like Mike said, this is our second week back. Last week we had a really nice tribute to our fallen filmmaker friend, Doug Sackman, rest in peace, brother. Doug would have just turned 44 years old. And I just want to say also thank you to everybody who called and texted and dropped comments down on the Doug Sackman tribute episode. I had a lot of people just reach out and say, hey, it was really nice to just think about Doug and hear some of those stories. So I really appreciate everybody for sharing that with me. And, we're happy to keep Doug's memory alive as much as we can. And yeah, it's good to be back. It's nice to have, we went from a sad topic last week to, a very fun topic this week, because literally that's what I love about comedy. Let's just take a minute to reflect and get a little cheesy. We're going to become a little corny for a minute, but really laughter is the best medicine. Is it not? I mean, how many times have you been having a shitty day or a shitty week and you put a comedy on and it makes you smile, it makes you laugh, or you maybe even hear yourself chuckle and you haven't heard that in a while. And it's a really nice thing. I was kind of having a bummer of a day a few days ago, and there I am studying my movies, and I put Old School on, and Will Ferrell's ass getting into the car while his wife is driving when she picks him up streaking. I just look up and I see Will Ferrell's ass coming at the screen, and I just start laughing hysterically. And it was just such a nice moment after having kind of like a shitty day, just to kind of be like, all right, at least I can rely on Will Ferrell's bare ass to make me laugh today. And obviously I'm being stupid when I say that, but I really feel like an honor and a privilege to make a comedy and know that there's going to be some people that are having shitty days out there, and maybe when they put this thing on, we can turn the frown upside down a little bit and have some fun, and we all can recognize that life is short, and you gotta have fun. Otherwise, you gotta blink and it'll be all over. And you didn't laugh, God damn it! That's a shame.
Well, Tommy, to that point, buddy, when I find myself kind of getting drenched in the news of the day with politics and crazy things happening as they are now, I sometimes I direct myself to put on specifically The Office or Curb Your Enthusiasm are my go-to things, because I know that those two shows, even if I've seen the episode before, I'm going to get a laugh out of it. So I may not be learning anything, or I may not be increasing my intelligence or my knowledge of the world of as it is, or it may not be a master class or some type of marketing video or a Tony Robbins speech, but Steve Carell as the boss there, and Pam and Jim and all those youngsters, and then Larry David and who's his buddy there, his go-to guy, his friend, not Vince Vaughn, but the guy that just passed away, Richard Lewis. Rest in peace to him. He was
I
great.
loved Richard Lewis. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll say this, Tommy, and it was really unspoken, but you see the friendship and the love between Larry David and Richard Lewis. Richard, the last season, he really does not look like himself. He's obviously in physical discomfort and pain. And Larry stood by him and put him on the show. And, because Richard was a comedy icon, and he brought a lot to the table, but a lot of other producers, I would suggest, would not have someone who was in that physical state on their comedy. But because Larry David's a man of integrity, at least with friendship, he still had Richard on the show. And unfortunately, Richard has since passed on, but he'll always live in that memory and in that program. And so there's a lot of things. You think about In Living Color, we could go down a whole thing with sketch comedy. We didn't really get into Saturday Night Live, In Living Color.
Damon Wayans, the Wayans brothers alone have had such an impact on comedy.
Yeah. And despite Scary Movie 4 with me walking out of it, they've had great careers. And there was a show on briefly in the 80s called Fridays, where Larry David got his start. Larry David and Michael Richards, who played Kramer, were on this kind of a competitive show towards SNL called Fridays. And that show only lasted like 2 or 3 seasons. Mad TV, which our friend Annie Mulhall from LDI Casting, she was actually a casting director on Mad TV. That show was getting better ratings than Saturday Night Live for a couple of seasons, I believe. So there's just so much to say about the wild world of comedy. And for your upcoming film coming up this fall, I believe you're shooting, Tommy, I'm sure all these things are just kind of popping in your brain with like, who can we cast and who can we do and what locations and all that.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
And also, I do want to, we're coming up on our hour, and we're almost up with our weekly film therapy session. But I just wanted to say that I have been studying these movies, and a couple of the things that I'm noticing from a production standpoint, uh, they don't need to be shot like, we're not shooting Casino here. Bob Richardson doesn't need to be the cinematographer. They don't need to be these elaborate shots from a production standpoint. I'm noticing a lot of wide shots, a lot of two shots, a lot of room for the actors to play. Situations where the editor can use multiple takes from, I should say, situations where the editor can easily intercut moments from multiple takes and string them together as if there were one take, with wider shots that have coverage that don't rely on, a lack of consistency when you're cutting from cut to cut, between take to take. So I am kind of starting to study this, but I've noticed one thing that they all have. One thing that I'm noticing, although they might, I don't want to say cheap out, but the coverage isn't that elaborate. However, when you open a scene in a comedy, and pay attention to this, almost all of the establishing shots in the movie have a really nice, whimsical production value to them, whether it's a big jib shot or a crane shot that kind of comes down, and we see some background actors, and they load the establishing shots up with production value and great cinematography, almost as if they know that, well, when we get into the scene, it's going to be pretty simple. It's going to be like medium shot, close up, and we're moving on. So that's something that I noticed. It's almost like a way to like trick the audience into like, yeah, you're watching a really nice, wonderfully produced cinematic movie. Look at this pretty establishing shot. All right, nitty gritty, get to the scenes, shoot them out in a very traditional coverage, and then here's another nice whimsical scene in between. So these are just little things that I'm noticing as I kind of make my way into this whole new world of comedy.
Yeah, I do think that some of your family stories, the Christmas one with Ed Asner, the Santa Files, was that the title of it, or Saving Christmas?
There's comedy in there, but they're not comedies.
Yeah, but I thought that they were some good natured stuff, I guess. I mean, I think that another thing to say, and someone, I think it might have been Eric, mentioned like dramedies, like there's dark comedies. I mean, there was a time in the 90s when you had a movie like Happiness, which is pitch black dark comedy, or In the Company of Men. I mean, that was, I'm sitting there laughing, but it's like you're laughing, but you know that this is some pretty dark stuff, and that's the point of it. I mean, what's American Psycho? Some people consider that to be a dark comedy, So it's
Sure.
just interesting that comedy is really kind of in the eye of the beholder, because
Yeah,
what
I mean,
makes
I'm a big horror fan, and horror comedy is its own genre. There are a lot of these like incredibly violent movies that people consider to be funny. You could say, Terrorizer 1 and 2, although it's super violent. Like, it's about a
the
crazy clown that rips people in two. Like, there's something kind of funny about that. Crazy clowns, or killer clowns from outer space. You gonna tell me that's not funny? Come on.
Yeah, sometimes with the horror, it's like if you go so over the top with the violence and the blood and guts and the grossness, it becomes like a mockery of itself, like an absurdist type of commentary on other horror films. And sometimes you have to be educated in the genre to get all that stuff. You know what I mean? Like if you're watching a horror film where they're kind of making fun of the genre being excessive and over the top, unless you're a horror fan, you might find this piece to be obnoxious or gross. But if you're a horror fan and you're seeing that they're making fun of the genre, you'll appreciate it.
Well, guys, here's what I want y'all to do for me as we wrap things up. I've got a lot of movies to watch in the next 7 or 8 weeks. So if everyone could do me a major favor and in the comments, drop down a comedy that I should watch. Say, Tommy, you'd be doing a disservice to your film if you didn't watch this movie to inspire you on your quest. I'd love it if you drop them down in the comments. I promise I'll check them out, and maybe we can talk about them next week on our next episode. Also, I just wanted to say thank you guys. Eric said something really sweet here about Doug. It was incredible to see the outpouring of love for him. I swear a movie could be made or should be made. You're not wrong about that. Laza talking about when he's walking out on movies, but I meant to say thank you for saying that. R.I.P. Doug. Appreciate that, Laza. And Eric, so this may be a little darker than we want to get, but 9/11 happened, and I had no idea what to do with myself. I put on the deleted scenes from Austin Powers 2, and it made the world a little better. Like we said, man, I appreciate you sharing that with us, Eric. Laughter really is a great medicine, and sometimes it's all we can do to cope is just to try to have a laugh. And Eric says Terrifier is great because the guy who plays Art has done clowning, miming, etc., and he's great at being funny without words. Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that Art the Clown comes from that background, but that makes a lot of sense. And Laza says the Leprechaun horror films can be quite funny. That is a fact. I think the world needs a new Leprechaun film. We're going to dust that guy off. I think we're ready to see him again. All right. Thank you so much, guys. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Turn the notifications bells, easy for you to say, on. And we love seeing you. We'll be here next week, and let's keep these conversations going. Mike, did you have anything you'd like to close out with?
Yeah, if people are interested, I'm still been doing my artwork, buddy. I'm having a lot of fun with it, and I have a big sale on the Foreign Object eBay store. You can get 3 of these sizes, 5x7s, 3 random 5x7s for $60, free shipping with that from the Foreign Object eBay store. And MikeMessier.com. If you scroll to the bottom, all my social media links, except for Facebook. I'm no longer on Facebook, Tommy. But all you have to do is go to MikeMessier.com, scroll to the bottom, and my books and my social media, Instagram and X and all that good stuff are on there. Eric says the artwork looks great. Well, thank you so much, Eric. And they would even look better in the privacy of your own home or as a gift for the special person in your life. So thanks, Eric Johnson, very contributing. Laza, Kim, and Charlie Short Films. We actually had a pretty raucous gathering of the Tommy and Michaelos today, Tommy. So thanks everybody, and happy birthday to Tommy DiNucci, and another year forward, buddy.
Yes, and don't forget to drop your movies that I should watch down in the comments, because I got movies to watch. I got a comedy to make. Let's do it. Guys, thank you so much. We're going to see you next week. Same time right here on And Action Filmmaking Podcast. Bye, guys.